So, hello, Mark, and thank you for joining me this evening. Well, I know for you in Colorado, it's the afternoon. So I'm with Mark Beckhoff at the moment. So, Mark, do you want to, for the viewers, introduce yourself?
Well, yeah, I taught animal behavior courses in conservation at the University of Colorado for many years, and I left about 10 years ago just to be on my own. I've done field research on a lot of different animals. I studied coyotes in the state of Wyoming for almost 9 years, penguins in Antarctica, fish and birds around my mountain home. And I'm really interested in the field of cognitive ethology and the field of compassionate conservation. Cognitive ethology is really the study of animal minds, animal emotion, animal cognition, animal awareness. And compassionate conservation is a rapidly growing international field that deals with the well-being of individual animals. And this basic bumper sticker for compassionate conservation is first to no harm. So I've been interested in these issues since I'm around 3.
Okay, so for quite a long time then.
Yeah, I have been. And it's great. I like my science. I like doing science. I don't worship science. I don't think science will answer all the questions that need to be answered. But one of the things that I argue, or we argue in our new book called The Animal's Agenda, is that for decades we've known enough to protect other animals. Mm-hmm. So when people say to me, we need the science, my response is it's already there.
It's already there.
In the United States, rats and mice are not recognized as animals in the Federal Animal Welfare Act. So it's that kind of thing where we know what they feel, we know what they think, we know who they are, we know what they need and want, but it's ignored.
Okay, so that's really useful because you actually mentioned your new book, The Animal's Agenda, which I was looking up and reading about on the internet, and I'm going to be coming to that shortly. I mean, Mark, I know you're sort of so well researched, published in a multitude of areas, like you said, including animal behavior, animal evolution, animal cognition, and of course sentience. And one area that I currently focus on in terms of my campaign for veganism is to raise awareness amongst the members of the public about the realities of the dairy industry, particularly, vegetarians who, because they have made the choice to be vegetarian and because they are not consuming animal flesh, but instead having, cow's milk, they don't feel that they're contributing to any harm or suffering. And, for viewers watching this, when I'm talking about harm or suffering, I'm really talking about the artificial insemination process and the separation of calf and cow. And I speak to people about the processes that a dairy cow has to go through to simply give us milk, from AI to separation to dehorning, debudding. What can you tell me about the effect that these processes have on these individuals?
Yeah, I mean, the breeding of the animals is violence. I mean, they're bred against their will. A friend of mine often says that they're really raped. She doesn't like to use that word. And then they pull their kids away. And we already know across mammals, birds, fishes, insects, lots of animals, that the separation of the young from the mother is really traumatic and stressful to them.
Right.
So it's kind of, to me, the exemplar of viewing these animals as breeding machines. It's viewing them as you're going to make babies and then we're going to take the babies away and you're going to make babies with any body or artificially. In any method we decide you're going to make the babies. But the mothers still go through the normal hormonal changes associated with pregnancy and motherhood. So It's really a double cross. And it's violence. I was giving a talk last week at the Veg Fest in Colorado, and abuse is violence. people don't like to use that word, but in the animals agenda, we use it sparingly, but we use it. And one of our editors didn't like it. She thought it was just too harsh. I don't mean that as a criticism of her at all. And we said no. And Jessica, my co-author, and I just said no. We use it judiciously, but this kind of treatment of non-human animals is violence. So let's just get over it.
Okay. And yet, I mean, you say that it's violent, and yet we have realms of legislation and guidelines and regulations that stipulate clearly in black and white how to humanely breed and enslave and to eventually kill these beings. Can we even use the term humane when it comes to how we are treating these animals, these non-human animals?
Well, once again, in our book, but we've done it independently in the past, said that when you hear the word humane or welfare, you can really believe that something's wrong.
Okay.
I mean, and we call it humane washing. Like Temple Grandin's Stairways to Heaven, that cows go down and to give them, quote, a better life in the last couple of minutes of their life after they've had a horrific life. I call those feel-good scams. And they are scams, and we might as well call them what they are. Maybe a few animals have a, quote, better life, but a better life is not necessarily a good life. And so, yeah, I worry when I hear the word humane. We argue that animal welfare patronizes other animals in the name of humans. And that's why, after all is said and done, we put forth what we call the science of animal well-being, which is focusing on the well-being of individual animals. Each individual life matters. So welfareists might say, well, we have a lot of cows, we have a lot of mice, we have a lot of, possums in New Zealand who they want to just, completely torture and get rid of. So it's okay if we get rid of a certain number, but that ignores the well-being of the individual animal.
Right.
And I always say, if someone came to me and said, well, there's enough of you in the world, we want to get rid of you.
There's a lot of humans.
I'd say, no, thank you.
There's a lot of humans.
So your point is really well made. I mean, people go, in the food industry, we'll increase the size of cages for chickens from 68 to 72 square inches. I mean, give me a break. That's nothing.
Yeah.
And, what's interesting in the UK is when the 5 Freedoms were put out in the mid-'60s, also called the Bramble Report, they really had nothing to do with freedom. They said, we're going to allow animals to feed and drink. Hello?
That's their right.
Let them, be able to move around, right? We want them to express normal species behavior. Of course you do. But it really had nothing to do with freedom. It never said, we're going to free them up.
Yeah.
So once again, to be fair, in the 60s when the 5 Freedoms were put out, it was an advance for the time. It really was. It was a step forward. But we haven't come much.
We've not come very far, have we?
Forward.
And our animal welfare legislation is that. It's the welfare of these non-human animals. It's not the rights of these non-human animals. I want to bring you to some of the work that you've done, some of the amazing work that you've done and research that you've conducted. Could you tell me and the viewers a little bit about an animal's ability? Does an animal have the ability to feel pain, to feel fear, to feel love, to be able to form attachments? One conversation that I recently had a week and a half ago outside the slaughterhouse with the slaughterhouse manager, I'd witnessed a truck go in to slaughter and I was crying, and he said, Dina, I don't know why you're crying. They don't know what's happening to them. They don't, they don't know what's going to go on in there. I don't know why you're crying. Can you perhaps tell me a little bit about whether I was just, getting overly emotional, or do these animals feel and know? Are they sentient in essence?
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, you weren't overly emotional. It's a travesty, a tragedy, what they're going through. I mean, there's ample research that shows these animals have deep and rich emotions. okay, they not only sense what's happening to them, but they smell, hear, and see what's happening to friends, family, and other animals in these slaughterhouses. So they not only suffer their own pain, but they suffer the pain of other animals. And it's not being, quote, anthropomorphic. I don't even talk about that anymore. It's a waste of time. I mean, people freely say, oh, my dog is happy, my dog is sad, my dog got embarrassed, my dog got jealous. Well, so too can cows and other, quote, food animals. So they got to be consistent across the board. And it is a sad statement. It's a sad statement for the individual going through that process. It's also a sad statement on humans who partake in that sort of activity and then think that the animals don't care. They care a lot.
I mean, in terms of scientifically, sorry, I'm interrupting you there, but just scientifically, what goes on in the brain of those beings? I mean, does the brain or parts of the brain react? Is there some sort of chemical change that happens which would be similar to that of the human brain if subjected to such an environment? What goes on there? What do you know about that can actually prove they feel something?
I don't know the details. I'm not a neurobiologist, but yes, if you do MRIs, if you look at the neurochemistry across mammals, we all share the same parts of the brain in the limbic system and a structure called the amygdala that's underscore our emotions, that process our emotions. So are they feeling fear and stress? Of course they are. Do I know what their fear and stress is like? No, I don't. But you can tell behaviorally and physiologically that they're experiencing fear and stress just like we do. It doesn't matter whether our fear and stress or their fear and stress is like ours. They own it. Each individual owns their own emotions. And the science, the neurobiology behind the study of non-human animal emotions supports that. I mean, we know that. Do they know that they're going to, quote, die? I don't think so, and I don't know. I mean, you can go a lot of ways on this discussion, but to me, that's not the key. To me, that's not the key question, because you can redirect the attention and say, well, they don't have the same sense of death that we do. Well, they likely don't. But it doesn't mean that at the moment they're not suffering and dying and experiencing deep and enduring stress. So that state at that time is really a negative state for them. That's kind of the word that welfarists, they talk about positive and negative states. Welfarists know that they experience negative states, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be doing enrichment programs and trying to change the laws. So I always tell them when they say, well, you don't really know this, and I'll go, well, if you don't really know it or you doubt it, then go get another job. I mean, why are you trying to make the lives better of animals who you don't think are really suffering?
Right.
I've actually had one guy say to me, well, I don't think they suffer, but the public does, so we need to please them. And I thought that I would never get into an elevator with this guy. No, seriously.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, we love these animals, and we need to do the best we can while we're harming and killing them. And I always say, I'm glad they don't love me. And I really mean that. It's to me, it's perverted.
Yeah.
That's the word I use. It's a perversion.
And psychopathic, in my personal opinion.
Like what?
It's psychopathic, and sociopathic. The fact that, these same people who write the legislation and the regulations, and yet then still cannot accept that these animals feel. As you said, why are we writing, all these guidelines, to create better welfare standards if you don't believe that they feel anything anyway? What's the point?
Yeah, it turned out to be a really good meeting in Brazil, in Rio, a couple of years ago on animal welfare, animal emotions, and we went out for lunch with a bunch of people, and there were 10 of us, I remember, 2 of us vegan, I think 1 vegetarian, and then without even a blink, 7 of the guys and some of the women sat down to a meal of 8 different types of meat. And so I didn't say anything because it just doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, they're going to eat it anyway. But afterwards I thought, and I was talking to one of the other people who did not share in that meal, about it. And finally, the next day, we did have a talk, and one of the guys said, and he was really sincere, he said, look, we have really high welfare standards here in Brazil. We're trying to improve them. So these animals had a really good life before they were killed. What do you do with that? You know what I mean? I mean, what am I supposed to do, right? He believes it. He cares about them. He loves the animals. And then he sits down and eats them. The analogy here would be a woman named Temple Grandin who does the Stairways to Heaven. I know her. We've talked. We disagree on not everything, but just about everything. She firmly believes she's helping the animals, and she firmly believes that we need to eat animals. We would be unhealthy if we didn't. And while she's trying to improve welfare standards on factory farms, she's refusing to try to close them down. So she'll tell you on the one hand they are horrific. That's why she's doing her work. If she thought they were great, she wouldn't do the work.
Right.
So the proof is in the pudding, if you will, that
so it's
they know things are bad and they're trying to improve them.
So it's hypocrisy in a way. In terms of just going back to the work that I do with the realities of the dairy industry, I've heard the cows when they're in the lairage about to be taken, and I've heard their bellows. I've been past dairy farms early in the morning, in the evening, and heard the bellows of cows whom, one might say that's just something that they naturally do. They've clearly been separated from their calves. The former cows that I mentioned are about to be killed for food. From your experience, from your research, what's going on for these mothers that have been separated from their children for their milk, basically?
Well, you can ask a human mother who's been treated like that, because they're going to have the same feelings of the loss of attachment, the breaking of an important social bond, the stress, maybe the fear that something bad is happening to their kid. But definitely they're highly stressed, and that makes them feel uncomfortable, and they know something's wrong. I mean, biologically, evolutionarily, female mammals, and females of other species, but we're talking about mammals now, are, if you will, endocrinologically, neurologically set up to be mothers. It's beautiful evolution. That's just how it works. So when you rip their young away, they're children. People get upset when I talk about non-human animals as children. They are their children. Biologists call them their young, their infants, their offspring. They're their children. And they have the same sorts of reactions as humans do. And once again, when they say, well, some skeptic will say, well, surely they're not like ours. And I'm saying the three women, I could pick three women out, and they're going to have different responses to the presence of and absence of their child.
Right.
So we're not the measuring tape. It doesn't matter what we feel. We know that neurologically, hormonally, they're going through hell.
Right.
And it's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people get upset with that, but there's certain behaviors or certain acts that are wrong. And I'm not going to sit down and write a philosophy book about what the word wrong means. It's wrong.
Your internal compass will tell you, right?
What's that?
Your internal compass will be able to tell you what's right and what's wrong if you just get in touch with it.
Well, the Bramble report said that animals should be able to express normal species behavior. So if you're a mother, there's normal species behavior. It didn't say for the first day or up until a point. And I stress that simply because it just really gets me upset when people go, well, we're doing the best we can. And I'm saying, well, the fourth freedom in the Bramble report is that animals should be allowed to express species typical behavior. Pacing back and forth in a zoo, pacing back and forth on a feedlot, having your children ripped away from you is not species normal behavior. No. So get over it.
And just just sort of shortly finishing off, you mentioned about, humans saying that's the best we can do. That's what we're trying to do that. And one of the biggest arguments that is often made by those who consume meat and dairy to vegans, or those campaigning for veganism, is, you know, human evolution, and that, you know, animals are bred to be eaten. That's what they're there for. And I say this in quotation marks, we didn't get to the top of the food chain if we didn't eat these animals. It's just the way it is. Well, is there anything you would say to, you know, in response to that?
Well, I mean, anthropologists and archaeologists have shown very conclusively that, you know, our ancestors definitely were omnivores. You know, they ate other animals. They ate lots of plants. They didn't have reprehensible places like slaughterhouses. They didn't have these, quote, humane farms where people go, well, we love the animals and we treat them like royalty, and then we slit their throat and we eat them. They went out and hunted the animals, if you will, on the animal's own terms. And so do I like that? No. But I think it's a different set of arguments about cultural ways of, you know, getting meat, getting animals for food, and mass industrial efforts that completely depersonalize the animals. And so my take is that maybe there's a few people, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but maybe there's a few people who, quote, need to eat other animals. Let's just say that, okay? Or need to eat animal products. But even if there were a tiny percentage, it would be minuscule compared to the number of people in the world.
Right.
And if that were the case, and I'm not saying it is, then you wouldn't need factory farms and you wouldn't need these humane farms. You might say, okay, you need a medicine, okay? And, you know, do I like that? No. But it would be far better than people going to McDonald's and other fast food places and slamming down Big Macs as if they're eating, you know, I don't even know. I mean, they don't recognize they're eating an individual who was a sentient being. Right.
Okay. And it's, again, it brings it back down to ultimately it's whom we're eating, it's not what we're eating. And of course, you know, mass factory farming, mass industrial sized dairy farms, these animals are simply commodities who have been removed from the simple, basic entitlement to feel when they actually, it's proven scientifically, biologically, psychologically, and as you're saying, they absolutely do feel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the whole system is perverse. You know, make babies, make animals, treat them like crap, kill them, and eat them. And they become, all they have is instrumental value. You know, the science of animal well-being we develop in the Animals Agenda, compassionate conservation, really looks to the inherent value of an individual. They're valuable because they're alive. They're not valuable, you know, they don't have only instrumental value. That's what philosophers call it, for what they can do to us. They have inherent or intrinsic value. And it's going to take a while to get others to see that, but we can't stop. And the who's for dinner and who we're eating really works. I remember when I first started writing about that and thinking about it, I had a lot of emails from people who were more seriously or were converting, if you will, to vegetarianism, because I'd say, who's for dinner? And it's a conversation stopper.
Right.
And then I'd explain to them about the emotional lives of the bacon, the sausage, the ham, the hamburger, the steak, the ribeye. They never say we're eating pig or cow. The only animal, not the only, but a young kid pointed this out to me, and it was a fascinating lesson from him. He said that, you know, with the mammals, we call them steak and burgers and bacon and sausage and ham, but we call chickens chickens and fish.
Right.
And I think there's a lot to be said about that, rather than we're eating bird or we're eating insect.
Right. So the disconnection.
The words we use really count.
Yeah.
I mean, That's
really important, and that's something that I'm definitely going to be taking away. The, you know, whom rather than what, and, you know, really seeing these individuals as individuals with their right to their own life. And I'm going to definitely be implementing that in my talks for the future. Just ending that there then, Mark, is there any final point that you want to make in relation to animal sentience? Any final point that you want the viewers to take away with them?
You know, the only thing I'd say is that we're learning more and more almost every minute. Yesterday, I posted an essay on Psychology Today about ravens who plan for the future and rats who know what they don't know. They remember what they forgot, and they make choices that are consistent with that, just like students at university might do. And so, you know, we now know that fishes are amazingly smart and sentient. Chickens, fishes. We just have so much more information coming in.
Yeah.
And so I always say it's not a question of whether or if non-human animals are emotional. It's why has it evolved. And, you know, on the upside of it, although the practice isn't really changing that much, there's almost no scientist today who will just debate that. Their behavior does not, you know, mirror their beliefs. And in our book, we talk about, we call it the knowledge translation gap, which basically is the failure to apply what we know to how we treat other animals.
Right.
I mean, so when people, like I said before, people, we want the science. My goodness, the science has been there for 30 years. And mice and rats are still considered to be non-animals in the Federal Welfare Act. You know, try telling that to a 4-year-old.
Right.
So one of the things we need to do is we need to bridge the knowledge gap. And like I said before, we need to start talking about companion animals. We like to say we're bringing the argument home. We like to say, what would you do it to a dog? And let's talk about dogs and cows and pigs and chickens and other animals who wind up as food. And the other thing I'll say is we got to get kids involved. We I gave a talk at a sanctuary here called Love and Arms. It's just outside of Boulder. And it's beautiful. And Jessica and I gave a talk that Tuesday night about our book. And it was just so inspirational. And there's so much hope when you meet these young people who are just passionate and dedicated to saving the lives of other animals.
And they're our hope for the future.
They are a hope for the future.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that you and I and we are, and we are, but they are hope because they're inheriting a world that is morally and ethically could be vastly different than the world we're in now. We're in a fairly good spot, you know, despite politics and stuff, but we're in a fairly good spot for changing things. But if you start raising kids who don't respect animals like they're doing in New Zealand, they're teaching them to kill animals, then you're just producing a generation of violence. And I know people think that's harsh, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I would say let's just, you know, make this big umbrella of compassion and produce a generation of individuals who are going to feel empathy and compassion and love for non-human animals. So is it going to happen overnight? Nope. But I'm guardedly optimistic if we had this conversation in 100 years, which we won't, but I hope somebody else do, things will be different. I am. Some people think I'm radically delusional, but I don't think I am.
I'm going to go with your hope and your enthusiasm because I'm with you there. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, and I accept that. But together we'll be, you know, with other amazing advocates, educators, and activists, we'll be planting the seeds for the next generation to be able to live in a much more kinder and compassionate world for all beings. So, Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate that.